Odoacer, born around 433 AD, was a figure shrouded in both history and mystery, largely due to the limited and fragmented records from the late antiquity period. He is believed to have been of Germanic origin, possibly from the Skyri tribe, though some scholars associate him also with the Rugi, or Huns. His father, Edeko, was a notable warrior, and possibly served under Attila the Hun, which could explain Odoacer's early exposure to military life and his familiarity with the political complexities of the late Roman Empire. Little is known about his childhood, but like many Germanic nobles of the time, he would likely have been trained in the arts of war from a young age. Odoacer's formative years were spent in the tumultuous climate of the late 5th century, a time when the Western Roman Empire was collapsing under the weight of internal decay and external pressure from migrating tribes. He may have spent part of his youth in the Roman military, either as a foederatus, a barbarian soldier allied to Rome, or as a member of a tribal war band. Such a background would have given him extensive experience in warfare, leadership, and negotiation, making him well suited for the political opportunities that the unstable Roman landscape presented. His early military career likely involved service as a commander of Germanic troops within the Roman army. Many Germanic soldiers and leaders during this period rose to positions of influence due to the empire's reliance on barbarian forces to defend its borders. Odoacer's rise through the ranks reflects his leadership qualities and the trust he gained from both his tribal warriors and the Roman authorities. It is probable that he first came to prominence in the service of Orestes, a Roman general who made his son, Romulus Augustulus, the last Western Roman emperor. Odoacer's origins are crucial to understanding his later actions. Although he was not Roman by birth, he operated within the Roman system and understood its administrative and military structures. His upbringing in an environment that blurred the lines between Roman and barbarian identities helped shape his political vision. This blend of Germanic warrior tradition and Roman military culture laid the foundation for Odoacer's bold move in 476 AD, when he deposed Romulus Augustulus and declared himself King of Italy, effectively ending the Western Roman Empire and marking the beginning of a new chapter in European history. Despite his barbarian roots, Odoacer maintained many Roman traditions, showing that his early life and origins were not solely defined by tribal identity, but were shaped by the evolving cultural interactions between Roman and Germanic worlds. His ability to navigate both spheres made him a transitional figure between antiquity and the early medieval era. Odoacer's tribal background places him within the complex web of Germanic peoples who migrated and settled across the collapsing boundaries of the late Roman Empire. Most sources associate him with the Siri, a lesser-known Eastern Germanic tribe that played a significant role in the power struggles of the 5th century. The Siri were not as prominent as the Goths or Vandals, but they were well known as fierce warriors and trusted foederati within the Roman military. As a result, their leaders often gained influence by serving Rome while maintaining strong connections to their native warrior traditions. It is believed that Odoacer grew up in this dual environment, where tribal loyalty coexisted with Roman military service. His father, Edeko, is a key figure in understanding Odoacer's heritage. Edeko was likely a chieftain or high-ranking noble within the Skyri, and some accounts suggest he was even politically active beyond his tribe. He is recorded in some sources as having served as an envoy or officer under Attila the Hun, a detail that highlights the fluid alliances of the period Adeko's connections to both Roman and Hunnic power brokers would have provided Odoacer with access to diplomatic and military networks that many of his peers lacked. Such exposure to multiple spheres of influence was crucial in shaping his later political success in Italy. Odoacer's family background includes hints of a broader political vision. His brother, Onulphus, or Onulf, also appears in historical records as an officer in the Roman army, even serving in high-ranking positions in the Balkans. This suggests that Odoacer's household wasn't merely of tribal nobility, but also deeply embedded in the military structures of the empire. The involvement of multiple family members in Roman service indicates that the family was adept at navigating the shifting power dynamics of the era, leveraging their tribal identity while gaining Roman authority. Little is known about Odoacer's mother or other kin, which is consistent with the historical invisibility of most women and non-military figures in late antique sources. However, the strength and mobility of his family suggest that he was raised in a politically astute environment where martial skill, shrewd diplomacy, and cultural flexibility were equally encouraged. This dual foundation allowed him to rise not only among the Germanic tribes, but also to claim leadership in Italy at a moment when Roman power was disintegrating. Odoacer's family and tribal origins were foundational in his later ability to appeal to diverse groups. Roman senators, barbarian soldiers, and Italian landowners alike. Though he was a foreigner in the traditional Roman sense, his background endowed him with the political instincts needed to position himself as a stabilizing force in a world that was rapidly fracturing along ethnic and regional lines. His ascent was not merely the result of brute force, it was a testament to his family's blended heritage and their role in the fluid identities of the late Roman world. Odoacer's early military career is closely tied to his integration into the Roman military system, a path followed by many Germanic warriors of his time. He likely joined the Roman army as a foederatus, a barbarian soldier serving under his own tribal leaders but on Rome's payroll. This position granted him access to military training, Roman logistics, and exposure to high-ranking officers. As the Western Empire faced increasing threats from both internal rebellions and external invasions, it came to rely heavily on barbarian recruits like Odoacer. This context provided him with opportunities to demonstrate leadership, forge alliances, and rise in influence despite his foreign origins. During the mid-5th century, Odoacer would have participated in campaigns across various regions of the empire, including Italy, Gaul, and possibly the Balkans. The chaotic nature of these conflicts meant that battles were often fought between shifting coalitions of Roman generals and barbarian warbands. Odoacer's early experiences would have exposed him to the fragile and volatile nature of imperial power. It is through these engagements that he likely developed a pragmatic approach to command, understanding when to fight for Rome's interests and when to advance his own historical accounts suggest that Odoacer served under General Ricimer, a powerful Romanized Germanic warlord who effectively ruled Italy through puppet emperors. Ricimer's career may have served as a blueprint for Odoacer, showing how a barbarian leader could manipulate imperial politics without formally seizing the throne. Odoacer's time in the service of Ricimer and other Roman generals would have provided first-hand experience in the politics of military command, diplomacy, and the fragile alliances that defined late Roman Italy. As the empire crumbled further, Odoacer gained prominence by commanding mixed forces composed of Germanic warriors from various tribes such as the Sciri, Heruli, and Rugi. His ability to unite these groups under his leadership highlights his charisma and strategic skill. He understood the grievances of the barbarian soldiers, who were often underpaid, marginalized, or used as expendable forces by Roman commanders. These grievances later fueled his decision to lead a revolt against Orestes, who had refused to reward his troops with land. Odoacer's early military experience was marked by adaptability and political awareness. He learned to navigate a system that was deeply suspicious of barbarian ambition, while also increasingly dependent on barbarian strength. His service in the Roman army gave him not only the martial experience needed to lead, but also a deep understanding of the collapsing structures of imperial authority. This knowledge would prove crucial in 476 AD, when he leveraged his military support to depose the last Western Roman emperor and establish himself as King of Italy. Odoacer's ascent within the Roman military hierarchy was both a product of the empire's dire need for capable commanders and his personal ability to navigate the delicate balance between loyalty and ambition. By the late 460s and early 470s, the Western Roman Empire was in a state of near constant civil strife. Emperors were placed on the throne and deposed at the whim of a powerful military elite, many of whom were Germanic warlords serving as Roman generals. Odoacer emerged within this volatile atmosphere as a trusted leader of foederati troops, especially those of Germanic origin, which gave him significant leverage in the political struggles of the period. His position as a commander of mixed Germanic units provided him a broader base of support than many other officers who relied primarily on Roman legions. Odoacer's reputation for fairness and strength attracted warriors from a variety of tribes, including Heruli, Rugi, and Turcilingi. This not only enhanced his military standing, but also his influence in the broader political landscape, where the shifting alliances of barbarian leaders could decide the fate of emperors. In a period when Roman authority was weakened, Odoacer's ability to maintain discipline and unity among his troops made him an indispensable figure in the fractured military apparatus. By the early 400s and 70s, Odoacer had risen to the rank of dux, a commander responsible for overseeing both Roman and barbarian troops. His tenure in this role coincided with the rise of Orestes, a Roman general who seized control in 475 AD, and appointed his young son, Romulus Augustulus, as Emperor. Odoacer's initial service under Orestes shows his willingness to work within the Roman system, while quietly building his own power base. At the same time, he likely recognized the dissatisfaction among foederati troops, many of whom were denied the land grants promised to them as payment for their service. When Orestes refused to fulfill these obligations, Odoacer seized the opportunity to act. In 476, he led his troops in a revolt that resulted in the defeat and execution of Orestes. Shortly thereafter, Odoacer deposed the young Romulus Augustulus, but rather than claiming the imperial throne for himself, he made a strategic decision. He declared himself King of Italy, acknowledging the nominal authority of the Eastern Roman Emperor while effectively ruling independently. This move demonstrated not just military strength, but political acumen, aligning himself with Roman legitimacy while asserting his own sovereignty. Odoacer's rise within the Roman military was the product of tactical intelligence, personal charisma, and a keen understanding of the crumbling state of Roman power. His ability to unite various barbarian groups under his command, while still operating within the framework of Roman authority, positioned him uniquely to take control of Italy. His calculated rise exemplifies the fluid nature of power in the late Western Empire, where military capability and political foresight could elevate a non-Roman into a role that transcended ethnic and imperial boundaries. The decline of the Western Roman Empire was a gradual process spanning several centuries, but it accelerated dramatically in the 5th century. By this time, the empire was weakened by a combination of internal decay and external threats. One of the most significant internal factors was political instability. Emperors were frequently overthrown, assassinated, or manipulated by powerful generals, many of whom were of barbarian origin. The concept of centralized authority eroded as rival factions competed for power, leaving the empire in a constant state of civil war and succession crisis. This instability undermined the legitimacy of imperial rule and created an environment in which ambitious military commanders, like Odoacer, could play decisive roles. Economically, the Western Roman Empire suffered from severe fiscal strain. Heavy taxation, inflation, and debasement of currency weakened the economy, while reliance on slave labor hindered technological and agricultural development. The collapse of Roman infrastructure further contributed to declining productivity. The empire was increasingly unable to fund its large standing army or maintain its extensive network of roads, cities, and fortifications. As resources dwindled, Rome became more dependent on barbarian federates, external tribes allied to Rome and paid to defend its borders. However, this reliance shifted power away from Roman citizens and into the hands of foreign mercenaries who often had little loyalty to the empire. External pressures were another crucial factor in Rome's decline. The migration of Germanic tribes, fleeing the advance of the Huns, brought large populations into Roman territory groups like the Visigoths, Vandals, Alans, and Suebi carved out their own kingdoms within former Roman lands. In 410 AD, the Visigoths famously sacked Rome, signaling a dramatic shift in the balance of power. Later, the Vandals crossed from Spain into North Africa, capturing the crucial grain-producing province and eventually sacking Rome again in 455 AD. Each loss of territory further weakened the empire's ability to sustain itself economically and militarily. The Roman military itself was no longer the disciplined and effective force it once had been. The recruitment of barbarian soldiers, though necessary, diluted Roman military identity and discipline. Roman legions were no longer composed of Roman citizens with deep ties to the state, but were instead manned by mercenaries whose loyalties were often personal and transactional. Many of these soldiers saw themselves as belonging more to their commanders than to the Roman state itself. This shift weakened the centralized command that had once been the empire's greatest strength. By the time Odoacer emerged as a leading figure, the Western Roman Empire had become a hollow shell of its former self. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD, carried out by Odoacer, was not a sudden death blow, but rather the final act in a long process of decline. With the government paralyzed, the economy shattered, and the military fragmented, the Western Empire dissolved into a patchwork of barbarian kingdoms, heralding the beginning of the Middle Ages in Western Europe. Odoacer's service under Orestes marked a crucial turning point in both his career and the history of the Western Roman Empire. Orestes, a former secretary to Attila the Hun, and later a Roman general, seized power in 475 AD by deposing Emperor Julius Nepos and installing his young son Romulus Augustulus as a puppet emperor. This maneuver effectively placed Orestes in full control of the imperial government, although his legitimacy was dubious. Odoacer, already a respected leader of Germanic federati, entered Orestes' service during this transitional period, aligning himself with the most powerful figure in Italy at the time. Orestes, however, faced a growing problem. The wages and promised land grants owed to the barbarian troops who formed the backbone of his military support. These soldiers, many of whom were Sciri, Heruli, and Rugii under Odoacer's command, had been instrumental in Orestes' rise to power. Yet once in control, Orestes refused to fulfill his commitments, likely fearing the loss of Roman land to foreign soldiers and the political backlash it would bring. This refusal sowed deep resentment among the federated troops, who saw themselves as both protectors of the empire and rightful claimants to the rewards they had been promised. Tensions escalated into open conflict in 476 AD. Odoacer, sensing both the displeasure of his soldiers and the weakening position of Orestes, rallied his forces and declared himself their leader. The military rebellion that followed was swift and decisive. Orestes fled to his stronghold in Pavia, but was soon captured and executed. Odoacer then marched on Ravenna, the administrative capital of the Western Empire, where he encountered little resistance. It was here that he deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last Western Roman emperor, in a bloodless coup marked by a symbolic rather than violent character. Rather than take the title of emperor himself, Odoacer made a calculated decision to assume the role of Rex Italiae, or King of Italy. He sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, requesting recognition as the ruler of Italy in Zeno's name. This strategic gesture preserved a semblance of continuity with Roman tradition, while cementing Odoacer's real power as an independent monarch. His rule effectively ended the Western Roman Empire, even though he continued to uphold certain Roman institutions and incorporate Roman officials into his administration. The Civil War and Odoacer's rise illustrate the final collapse of Roman central authority in the West. His ascent from tribal commander to king was not the result of a grand invasion, but of internal disintegration. Orestes' failure to balance Roman political expectations with barbarian military demands accelerated the empire's downfall, paving the way for Odoacer's innovative model of rulership. Through his pragmatic approach, Odoacer provided a bridge between Roman imperial governance and the emerging Germanic kingdoms that would shape early medieval Europe. The mutiny of the Foederati troops in 476 AD was not merely an isolated military uprising, but rather the culmination of long-standing tensions between the Roman state and the barbarian soldiers who now formed the backbone of its army. These troops, drawn from various Germanic tribes such as the Sciri, Heruli, and Rugii, had been recruited as federates, foederati, under special agreements that provided them with payment or land in exchange for military service. Over time, however, the weakening financial capacity of the Western Roman Empire meant that these agreements were increasingly violated or delayed. The foederati, despite their loyalty and indispensability, were often treated with suspicion and marginalization by Roman administrators. By the time of Orestes' rule, these grievances had reached a breaking point. Orestes, having seized power by installing his son, Romulus Augustulus, on the throne, had relied heavily on these barbarian troops to maintain control. Yet he refused to honor their demands for land settlement in Italy, fearing that distributing Roman estates to foreign soldiers would provoke resistance from the Roman senatorial elite and landowning aristocracy. This refusal was viewed not merely as a political oversight, but a betrayal of trust by the troops, who had risked their lives for what they thought were promised rewards. Odoacer, who commanded many of these foederati, recognized the growing discontent and used it to galvanize his troops. He positioned himself as the champion of their cause, urging them to assert their rights through collective action. Under his leadership, the mutiny transformed into a coordinated rebellion. The Foederati abandoned their allegiance to Orestes and marched against him, overwhelming his loyal forces with superior numbers and battlefield efficiency. Their mutiny was distinguished not only by its military success, but also by its broader implications. The soldiers were revolting not just against a general, but against the very Roman system that had failed to adapt to their new status. The capture and execution of Orestes marked the decisive moment of the rebellion. Soon after, the Foederati entered Ravenna, where Odoacer confronted and deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Remarkably, the deposition of Romulus was achieved without bloodshed, as Odoacer recognized the youth and innocence of the boy emperor, sparing his life and sending him into comfortable retirement. This act symbolized not just a political transition, but a new order in which barbarian leaders were no longer content to serve under Rome. They now ruled in their own right. The mutiny of the Foederati was more than a military uprising. It was a watershed moment in European history. It highlighted the deep structural flaws of the late imperial system, which relied on the strength of barbarian troops without integrating them fully into its social and political fabric. The rebellion was a direct consequence of Rome's inability to reward its defenders and a clear signal that the old imperial order could no longer sustain itself. Odoacer's leadership turned this mutiny into a foundational moment for the post-Roman world, signaling the emergence of Germanic rule on the Italian peninsula and the dawn of the Middle Ages. The overthrow of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD stands as one of the most symbolic events in Western history, marking the end of the Western Roman Empire and the beginning of a new political era. Romulus Augustulus, whose name ironically evoked both Rome's mythical founder and its first emperor, was a mere teenager when he was placed on the throne by his father, Orestes. Orestes had seized power by deposing Emperor Julius Nepos, but lacked the legitimacy to claim the imperial title himself. Thus, he elevated his son as a figurehead, hoping to rule through him. However, the fragile nature of his regime became immediately apparent, as it depended entirely on the loyalty of Foederati troops, many of whom were increasingly resentful of Rome's broken promises. Odoacer, a rising figure among the Germanic soldiers, capitalized on this discontent. His ability to rally support among the Foederati made him the natural leader of a rebellion aimed at securing what the troops believed was rightfully theirs: land in Italy and recognition of their status. When Orestes refused to grant these demands, the Foederati mutinied under Odoacer's command. Orestes fled to Pavia, where he was captured and executed by the rebels, leaving Romulus Augustulus vulnerable and defenseless in Ravenna, the imperial capital. With the political and military framework shattered, Odoacer marched into the city with little opposition. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus was conducted in a manner that reflected both the reality of the political situation and Odoacer's strategic mindset. Rather than executing or humiliating the young emperor, Odoacer chose to spare his life, an act that may have been intended to demonstrate respect for the Roman tradition or to avoid alienating the Roman population. Romulus was sent into comfortable exile, reportedly to live with relatives in Campania with a pension, an outcome that stood in stark contrast to the brutal fates of previous overthrown rulers. This peaceful removal reflected the fact that Romulus had never been a true wielder of power, and his downfall was seen more as the collapse of an institution than the defeat of a tyrant. After removing Romulus, Odoacer took a calculated political step. Instead of assuming the imperial purple, he sent the imperial regalia to the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, formally acknowledging the end of a separate Western court. In a diplomatic gesture that preserved the appearance of Roman unity, Odoacer asked Zeno to recognize him as the ruler of Italy in the emperor's name. Zeno reluctantly accepted, and Odoacer took the title Rex Italiae, or King of Italy. This act signaled the transition from Roman imperial rule to Germanic kingship, a blending of Roman administrative continuity with the new political realities of a post-imperial age. The overthrow of Romulus Augustulus did not result in an immediate collapse of life or culture in Italy. Instead, it ushered in a period where Roman bureaucratic institutions continued to function under the authority of a Germanic ruler, reflecting the complex interplay between old and new forms of power. The event itself has come to symbolize not only the fall of the Western Roman Empire, but also the transformation of Europe, as older structures gave way to medieval kingdoms. Odoacer's relatively bloodless coup stands as a testament to the adaptability of power in a world where ethnicity, military strength, and political recognition were increasingly intertwined. The year 476 AD has become universally recognized as the symbolic endpoint of the Western Roman Empire, an event that encapsulates centuries of decline, crisis, and transformation. This moment was not marked by a dramatic fall or a catastrophic collapse, but rather by a transition of power in which the Roman imperial title was quietly retired. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus by Odoacer, a Germanic military leader, officially severed the last thread connecting the western half of the empire to its ancient institutions. Romulus, a young and powerless emperor placed on the throne by his father Orestes, was more a victim of circumstance than an active participant in the political dynamics that sealed Rome's fate. The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not come as a sudden shock to contemporaries. For decades, Roman authority in the West had existed in name more than reality. The empire's administrative functions were increasingly fragmented, and regions such as Gaul, Hispania, and Africa had already fallen under the control of various Germanic kingdoms. Instead of a coherent imperial state, the West had become a patchwork of competing forces in which Roman institutions coexisted uneasily with new political entities. By the time Odoacer deposed Romulus, the empire had already lost its core. Financial stability, military discipline, and administrative cohesion. Odoacer's decision to send the imperial regalia to Emperor Zeno in Constantinople was a calculated gesture that signaled the end of separate Western imperial rule. It symbolized that Italy, once the heart of the empire, would now be governed by a king rather than an emperor. Rome's institutions did not vanish overnight, however. Under Odoacer's rule, many continued to function as before. The Senate still met, Roman law persisted in many areas, and the Italian aristocracy retained some of its influence. This continuity masked the deeper transformation. The imperial framework that had stood for nearly 500 years was now a relic of the past. The year 476 AD is thus a convenient marker, chosen by later historians to denote the transition from classical antiquity to the medieval world. In reality, the shift was far more gradual, shaped by the convergence of Roman, Germanic, and Christian cultures. Odoacer's reign, followed by that of the Ostrogothic king Theodoric, preserved much of Rome's legacy while also reshaping it. Latin remained the language of administration and culture, and the law codes of the Roman Empire continued to influence governance. Yet the loss of the Western imperial throne marked the end of Rome's political unity, paving the way for a new age defined by localized power and emerging kingdoms. The end of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD was not merely a moment of collapse, it was a transformation. It marked the end of a political system that had dominated the Mediterranean world for centuries and the beginning of a new order that would define European history for generations. While the empire lived on in the east as the Byzantine Empire, the West embarked on a path that blended Roman heritage with barbarian rule, setting the stage for medieval Christendom and the future nation-states of Europe. After deposing the young Emperor Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD, Odoacer faced the challenge of legitimizing his authority in a landscape where Roman imperial institutions still held symbolic weight, rather than assuming the title of emperor himself, a step that would have likely alienated the Eastern Roman Empire and antagonized Roman lawmakers. Odoacer chose to adopt a more strategic designation, Rex Italiae, or King of Italy. This choice was a deliberate act of political pragmatism. It acknowledged the reality of his power while avoiding a direct affront to the imperial tradition. By choosing a title rooted in long-standing Germanic customs, Odoacer bridged the worlds of Roman and barbarian governance. Odoacer's proclamation as king was not a unilateral declaration. He sought formal recognition from the Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, the ruler of the undivided Roman world after the fall of the Western imperial line. In a symbolic gesture, Odoacer sent the imperial insignia of the Western Empire, crown, purple cloak, and scepter, to Zeno, signaling that he would rule Italy not as a rebel or usurper, but as the emperor's representative Zeno. Though initially supportive of Julius Nepos, the deposed Western emperor in Dalmatia, eventually recognized Odoacer's authority. This political exchange preserved a measure of continuity and avoided the outbreak of a civil war between East and West. As King of Italy, Odoacer inherited a complex society still deeply embedded in Roman traditions. He did not dismantle the existing administrative framework. Rather, he maintained the Senate, retained Roman law, and appointed Romans to key positions. He minted coins bearing the emperor's name to project a sense of legal continuity. At the same time, he provided land for his Germanic followers in northern Italy, fulfilling promises that previous Roman leaders had failed to honor. This balance between accommodation and reform strengthened his position, allowing him to rule with a sense of legitimacy in the eyes of both Romans and Germanic soldiers. Odoacer's reign demonstrated that kingship rooted in military authority could coexist with Roman political culture. His approach differed from earlier barbarian leaders who had sought to dominate or displace Roman elites. Odoacer's rule showed respect for Roman identity, even as it marked a clear departure from the imperial system that had defined Italy for centuries. His governance became a prototype for later rulers, such as Theodoric the Great, who similarly integrated barbarian kingship with Roman institutions. The proclamation of Odoacer as King of Italy thus marked a pivotal moment in European history. It signaled the end of Roman imperial rule in the West, but not the end of Roman cultural and legal influence. Odoacer's position as king blended Germanic political traditions with Roman administrative continuity, creating a model for early medieval governance that would shape the identity of Western Europe. His reign laid the groundwork for the transition from an imperial world to a kingdom-based feudal landscape, while preserving the Roman legacy that would endure in law, language, and governance for centuries to come. Odoacer's rule over Italy from 476 to 493 AD is notable for its careful balance between innovation and continuity. Despite being a foreign-born king in a land deeply shaped by Roman tradition, Odoacer demonstrated considerable political acumen by preserving the essential structures of Roman governance. Rather than imposing an entirely new system of administration, he maintained the Senate, which continued to function as a respected advisory body. This continuity helped Odoacer win the support of the Roman aristocracy, whose involvement was essential for managing the complex bureaucracy of Italy. One of the cornerstones of Odoacer's administrative policy was maintaining Roman law as the foundation of legal and civil order. The persistence of Roman legal practices under his reign provided stability and ensured that the everyday life of Roman citizens was not unduly disrupted. Judicial processes continued to be conducted in Latin, courts remained active, and Roman officials served alongside Gothic and Germanic officers. This legal continuity reassured Roman landowners, clergy, and merchants who feared that a barbarian takeover might erode their property rights or social privileges. Odoacer's economic policies reflected both practical needs and political goals. To fulfill promises made to his Germanic followers, he redistributed land, especially in northern Italy, but did so strategically. Rather than conducting wholesale confiscation, he granted lands in a way that minimized conflict with Roman landowners. Such policies helped strengthen loyalty among his military supporters while avoiding outright rebellion from the Italian elite. By preserving agricultural productivity and protecting property rights, Odoacer ensured the steady flow of taxes and resources required to govern a war-torn region. The king also took steps to strengthen public infrastructure and enhance the position of Italy in a post-imperial world. He repaired fortifications, roads, and parts of the aqueduct system, facilitating both internal communication and defense. Additionally, Odoacer issued coins in the name of Emperor Zeno, emphasizing the symbolic continuity of Roman legitimacy, even as he ruled independently. These actions show a sophisticated understanding of political symbolism and stability, as well as the economic importance of monetary confidence in a fragile post-imperial society. Perhaps the most important aspect of Odoacer's governance was his ability to navigate cultural and administrative fusion. He did not attempt to Romanize his Germanic followers completely, nor did he impose Germanic customs wholesale upon the Roman population. Instead, he created a hybrid system that drew strength from both traditions. This delicate balance allowed Italy to retain a semblance of Roman identity during a period of dramatic change. Odoacer's administrative reforms and pragmatic governance formed the nucleus of a new political model, one that would be refined by later rulers such as Theodoric the Great and eventually influence the development of early medieval European monarchies. Odoacer's relationship with the Eastern Roman Empire, ruled from Constantinople, was a defining feature of his reign and a key element in legitimizing his authority in Italy. From the beginning, Odoacer sought to position himself not as an emperor or rival, but as a loyal vassal of the Eastern court. Upon deposing Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD, Odoacer sent the imperial regalia, symbols of Western imperial authority, to Emperor Zeno. This act symbolically acknowledged Zeno as the sole Roman emperor and signaled Odoacer's willingness to govern Italy under his nominal authority. In response, Zeno recognized Odoacer as Patricius, a high-ranking Roman title, and de facto ruler of Italia. Although he never formally granted him the title of king, this mutual accommodation allowed both leaders to maintain imperial continuity without provoking a confrontation. Despite this formal recognition, the relationship between Odoacer and the Eastern Empire was fraught with underlying tensions. Odoacer's rule had effectively rendered the Western imperial throne obsolete, raising questions about the future unity of the empire. Moreover, Odoacer's growing confidence in Italy soon led him to pursue an independent foreign policy. When he invaded Dalmatia in 480 AD and killed Julius Nepos, a former Western emperor who still had the backing of Constantinople, Odoacer greatly alarmed Zeno and his advisors. Although this move eliminated a potential rival, it also strained Odoacer's claim to be a loyal representative of imperial authority. Odoacer's involvement in the politics of the Balkans further tested relations with the East. His attempts to extend his influence over Noricum and other border regions were perceived as challenges to Eastern Roman territorial control, while Odoacer sought to consolidate Italy's security by stabilizing neighboring territories. Zeno viewed these actions as encroachments on his jurisdiction. These regional maneuvers contributed to Zeno's growing suspicion that Odoacer intended to expand his rule beyond Italy and establish himself as an independent sovereign, undermining Constantinople's claims to universal authority. The turning point in Odoacer's relations with the Eastern Empire came with Zeno's decision to support Theodoric, the Ostrogothic leader, as a counterweight to Odoacer's growing power. Zeno essentially gave Theodoric his blessing to invade Italy and depose Odoacer, framing the campaign as a restoration of imperial order. This political maneuver was typical of Byzantine diplomacy, using one barbarian leader against another to maintain a balance of power. While publicly maintaining a facade of cooperation with Odoacer, Zeno privately encouraged Theodoric's ambitions, hoping to weaken the Italian king while reinforcing Eastern control by proxy. Ultimately, Odoacer's initially cordial relationship with the Eastern Empire devolved into rivalry and geopolitical chess. His efforts to govern Italy as a loyal client of the emperor could not overcome the political realities of the time. The Eastern Roman Empire, ever wary of strong independent rulers in the West, saw Odoacer's authority as a potential threat. Zeno's support of Theodoric set the stage for the downfall of Odoacer and signaled Byzantium's determination to shape the destiny of Italy, even after the formal end of Western imperial rule. The drama of Odoacer's reign thus highlighted both the fragility of post-Roman power structures and the enduring influence of Constantinople in the Western Mediterranean. Although Odoacer maintained many aspects of Roman governance, including the Senate, his rule was not without friction. The Roman Senate, composed of aristocratic families who had long served as pillars of imperial administration, initially accepted Odoacer's authority due to his strategy of preserving traditional institutions. Many senators even played advisory roles in his government, recognizing that cooperation was beneficial for maintaining stability in the face of collapse. Despite this initial collaboration, deeper ideological and political tensions soon emerged. The Senate remained a body inherently tied to the Roman imperial legacy, while Odoacer ruled as a king rooted in Germanic traditions, a dynamic that inevitably led to conflict. One significant source of friction was land redistribution. To secure the loyalty of his Germanic soldiers, Odoacer granted them lands as compensation for their service. This practice was not unprecedented, but it often meant the partial confiscation or reallocation of estates traditionally owned by Roman aristocrats. Although Odoacer attempted to administer these shifts carefully, such policies struck at the very heart of senatorial power, which was deeply rooted in land ownership and the traditional Roman system of patronage. As a result, land reforms strained relations with the Senate, whose members began to perceive Odoacer as a ruler who subtly undermined their societal dominance. Another point of tension emerged from Odoacer's growing autonomy in foreign and domestic affairs. Although he initially ruled under the nominal authority of the Eastern Roman Emperor, he increasingly acted independently, intervening in Dalmatia, controlling taxation, and even issuing coins in his own name. This autonomy suggested a break from Roman tradition, in which legislative and executive power was assumed to rest with the imperial throne. By assuming responsibilities that belonged to the emperor, Odoacer inadvertently positioned himself in direct opposition to the Senate's role as guardians of Roman constitutional order. Their loyalty began to waver as he appeared less as a steward and more as a sovereign king. Religious tensions also contributed to the growing conflict. Odoacer, though not aggressively anti-Roman or anti-Christian, represented a break from the long-standing tradition of emperors who wielded both temporal and religious authority. The Senate, closely linked to the Catholic Church and conservative Roman values, grew uneasy with a king of foreign lineage and Arian associations, even if these associations were less pronounced than those of later Gothic rulers. While Odoacer attempted to maintain religious peace, the mere fact of his non-Roman origin created a cultural gap that could not be fully bridged. Ultimately, the conflict between Odoacer and the Roman Senate highlighted the limits of hybrid governance in a transitional age. Although he preserved Roman institutions and sought to work with the traditional elite, Odoacer's rule demonstrated the inevitable tensions between an emerging post-imperial monarchy and the remnants of an imperial aristocracy. These tensions weakened his internal support and left him vulnerable to external challenges. When Theodoric the Ostrogoth invaded Italy with the blessing of the Eastern Emperor, many senators either remained neutral or supported the Goths, signaling their preference for a return to imperial legitimacy, even under foreign rule. Odoacer's experience thus revealed the complexity of trying to reconcile Roman senatorial authority with the new realities of barbarian-led kingship. Odoacer's reign in Italy coincided with a period of significant religious complexity, shaped by debates over orthodoxy, heresy, and the role of the Church within political life. Although Odoacer was of Germanic origin and may have been raised in an Arian Christian tradition, commonly associated with many Germanic tribes, his religious policies were marked by tolerance and pragmatism rather than zealotry. Unlike later rulers such as Theodoric the Great, Odoacer did not attempt to impose Arianism or enforce religious conformity. Instead, he acknowledged the dominance of Nicene Christianity, Catholicism, within Roman society, and allowed its institutions to flourish. This approach helped secure the support of Roman bishops and maintain a degree of religious stability in a land where Christianity was closely intertwined with cultural identity. Odoacer's respect for the Church was demonstrated in his interactions with prominent Roman religious leaders. He is known to have corresponded with Pope Simplicius and later Pope Gelasius I, who, despite expressing theological reservations, acknowledged Odoacer's rulership due to his maintenance of public order. Odoacer also intervened in ecclesiastical affairs when necessary, including resolving disputes over episcopal appointments, which had become politically charged during the empire's decline. His involvement was generally aimed at ensuring social stability rather than asserting personal religious authority, reflecting his understanding of the Church's role as a critical mediator between state and society. A key component of Odoacer's religious policy was the preservation of church property and privileges. He did not seize church lands or interfere with its spiritual jurisdiction, even as he distributed land to his Germanic followers. This restraint was significant, given the economic and political power the Church wielded through its vast estates. By respecting church holdings and its liturgical autonomy, Odoacer avoided alienating Rome's most organized and influential institution. His rule thus fostered an environment in which Catholic bishops could continue their work unimpeded, reinforcing Rome's identity as both a spiritual and cultural center. Moreover, Odoacer's willingness to preserve Christianity's social infrastructure helped stabilize Italy during a time of political transition. Churches continued to serve as centers of education, charity, and local governance, maintaining continuity in the lives of ordinary people. This allowed Odoacer to govern without provoking religious conflict, a notable achievement in an era when doctrinal disputes frequently fueled political upheavals. His moderation stood in contrast to the sometimes divisive policies of his predecessors and successors, reflecting his broader philosophy of rule through accommodation rather than confrontation. Despite his tolerance, Odoacer remained an outsider in the eyes of some Catholic elites. His status as a king of foreign descent, combined with the absence of Christian imperial sacrality, meant that he could never fully embody the religious political ideal of a Roman ruler. Nevertheless, his policies succeeded in preserving Christianity as a unifying force within Italy and laid the groundwork for future interactions between barbarian rulers and the Roman Church. The religious peace he maintained endured even after his fall, underscoring the importance of diplomacy and compromise in times of profound transformation. The relationship between Odoacer and Theodoric the Great, the Ostrogothic king, began with cautious diplomacy, but ultimately escalated into one of the most decisive conflicts of the late 5th century. Initially, both rulers shared similar backgrounds. Each was a Germanic leader who had risen to power through service in Roman institutions, and each governed a Romanized population with the blessing, or at least the tolerance, of the Eastern Roman Empire. Their mutual interest in maintaining peace and stability suggests that early on, an alliance was not only possible but likely considered by both parties. In fact, there is evidence that the two rulers may have agreed to recognize each other's authority in their respective territories, with Theodoric ruling in the Balkans and Odoacer in Italy. However, this initial accommodation was undermined by the shifting political landscape, particularly in Constantinople. Emperor Zeno, who remained wary of powerful independent rulers in the West, increasingly saw Odoacer as a threat, especially after Odoacer intervened in Dalmatia and killed Julius Nepos, a Roman ruler still recognized by the Eastern Empire. Furthermore, as Odoacer consolidated power in Italy, Zeno feared he might seek wider influence. At the same time, Theodoric, restless and facing internal challenges among the Ostrogoths, sought new opportunities for expansion. Sensing an opportunity to redirect Theodoric's ambitions, Zeno encouraged him to invade Italy and depose Odoacer, framing the mission as an imperial mandate to restore Roman order. Theodoric accepted Zeno's offer and led the Ostrogoths into Italy in 488 AD. The campaign was brutal and protracted, involving a series of battles that tested both leaders' military skills. Odoacer initially resisted effectively, maintaining control of major cities such as Ravenna and Verona. Both sides employed Roman-style tactics and drew upon mixed forces that included Romans, Goths, and other Germanic soldiers. The stalemate continued for years, during which cities changed hands, populations suffered siege conditions, and the political landscape remained uncertain. Yet despite his resilience, Odoacer gradually lost ground to Theodoric's relentless pressure and superior military organization. After several years of conflict, Odoacer was forced to retreat into Ravenna, his last stronghold. In 493 AD, with food supplies dwindling and no relief in sight, he agreed to a negotiation brokered by the Bishop of Ravenna. The terms seemed to promise a peaceful settlement. The two rulers would share power and jointly govern Italy. Odoacer, worn down by years of war, accepted the compromise. But it was a deception. During a ceremonial banquet meant to mark their reconciliation, Theodoric had Odoacer assassinated, reportedly killing him with his own hand. This act, while treacherous, was characteristic of the ruthless politics of the era and ensured Theodoric's uncontested rule. The conflict between Odoacer and Theodoric marked the final transition of Italy from Roman imperial administration to Germanic kingship. While Odoacer had sought to blend Roman institutions with barbarian rule, Theodoric took this synthesis even further, establishing a kingdom that maintained Roman law, language, and tradition under Gothic leadership. Odoacer's fall underscored the precarious nature of power in the post-Roman West. His alliance with Theodoric, which might have preserved a dual Germanic authority in the West, gave way to a stark lesson in political realism. In the struggle for power, diplomacy often provided a prelude to deadly ambition. The final war between Odoacer and the Ostrogoths, led by Theodoric the Great, stands as one of the most pivotal conflicts of the late 5th century. A clash that would reshape the political landscape of Italy for generations to come. Although Odoacer had secured support across Italy through a combination of Roman administrative continuity and Germanic military loyalty, he faced an existential threat when Emperor Zeno of Constantinople endorsed Theodoric's invasion. Theodoric, a seasoned military commander and king of the Ostrogoths, sought both territorial expansion and political legitimacy. Under the guise of restoring imperial order, he led his people into Italy in 488 AD, initiating a campaign that would span nearly 5 years of relentless warfare. The war began with fierce engagements in northern Italy. Odoacer's forces initially managed to repel several Gothic advances, proving that the Italian king was still a formidable military leader. Battles at the Adda River and Verona demonstrated both sides' adept use of Roman battle tactics, heavy infantry formations, cavalry maneuvers, and fortified defensive positions. However, the Ostrogoths, whose numbers were bolstered by tribal unity and the promise of land, gradually gained the upper hand. Their relentless offensive pushed Odoacer southward, forcing him to abandon control over much of northern Italy. The conflict soon shifted into a war of attrition. Odoacer, now on the defensive, retreated into Ravenna, the imperial capital he had inherited, and its impregnable marshy defenses. This strategic city became the focal point of the struggle. While Odoacer held out behind its walls, Theodoric laid siege, cutting off supplies and tightening the blockade. The war dragged on, bringing devastation to the countryside, disrupting trade routes, and causing immense suffering among both Romans and barbarian settlers. Yet neither side relented, each driven by deep conviction. Odoacer to preserve his sovereignty over Italy, and Theodoric to fulfill his destiny as a ruler sanctioned, however minimally, by the Eastern Roman Empire. By 493 AD, the war reached its climax. Unable to break Ravenna's defenses but unwilling to leave Italy in chaos, Theodoric agreed to negotiate. With the mediation of Bishop John of Ravenna, the two leaders arranged a truce. Under the terms, Odoacer and Theodoric would rule jointly, sharing authority over Italy. Odoacer, exhausted and cornered, accepted the agreement, likely hoping it would ensure peace and preserve at least part of his authority. However, the peace was short-lived. During a banquet held to formalize the power-sharing arrangement, Theodoric assassinated Odoacer, reportedly striking the fatal blow himself. His act was as much a political statement as it was a personal one. It eliminated the last obstacle to his rule and cemented his position as the sole ruler of Italy. The final war between Odoacer and the Ostrogoths marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. Odoacer's death symbolized the failure of the first attempt to merge Roman administrative tradition with barbarian governance. In his place, Theodoric ushered in a new order, preserving Roman institutions while ruling as a Gothic king. This transition set a precedent for the hybrid political entities that would define medieval Europe. The conflict also underscored the decisive influence of Constantinople in Western affairs, even as the Western Empire itself had faded into history. The war and its aftermath became a model for the interplay of warlords, kings, and emperors in a world struggling to redefine power in the wake of Rome's fall. The Siege of Ravenna, which unfolded between 490 and 493 AD, was the dramatic culmination of the conflict between Odoacer, king of Italy, and the Ostrogothic leader Theodoric the Great Ravenna. A city of immense strategic and symbolic importance had once served as the capital of the Western Roman Empire due to its natural defenses, surrounded by marshes and protected by waterways that made direct assault extremely difficult. When Odoacer retreated into Ravenna after a series of military setbacks, he aimed to leverage the city's defenses to withstand Theodoric's advance and prolong his resistance. For Theodoric, capturing Ravenna was essential, both to legitimize his rule in the eyes of the Romans and to eliminate the last obstacle to his dominion over Italy. The siege itself was characterized not by continuous open battle, but by attrition, blockade, and psychological warfare. Theodoric's forces encircled the city, cutting off supplies from land and sea, while Ravenna's marshy surroundings hindered siege engines and direct assault. The prolonged encirclement made hunger and disease increasingly severe inside the city. Odoacer remained defiant, hoping that his defenses, combined with possible external support or a weakening of Gothic resolve, would break the deadlock. The Italian population within Ravenna, already strained by years of war, now faced starvation and hardship under the extended blockade. Despite the stalemate, Theodoric proved patient and persistent. His decision to maintain the siege rather than withdraw suggested he understood the symbolic weight of victory in Ravenna. In addition to its defensive advantages, Ravenna embodied Roman imperial continuity, a continuity Theodoric sought to inherit. During the long months of the siege, he consolidated control over the rest of Italy, securing allies, suppressing resistance, and positioning himself as the logical successor to Roman authority. Diplomatically, he maintained contact with Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, reinforcing the legitimacy of his campaign and countering any claims Odoacer might invoke as a lawful representative of Rome. The turning point in the siege came not through military assault, but through negotiation. With supplies exhausted and no relief in sight, Odoacer agreed to a truce in 493 AD. The two leaders met under the mediation of Bishop John of Ravenna, who helped broker a settlement that called for shared rule. Odoacer and Theodoric would jointly govern Italy. The arrangement seemed to promise a peaceful conclusion after years of warfare, an unprecedented co-kingship rooted in practical necessity rather than ideology. However, this peace was short-lived. During a banquet held to celebrate their pact, Theodoric assassinated Odoacer, allegedly striking him down with his own sword. With Odoacer dead, the siege of Ravenna came to a brutal yet decisive end. Theodoric emerged as the undisputed ruler of Italy, ushering in the Ostrogothic kingdom, a regime that preserved Roman traditions while integrating Gothic military authority. The siege's outcome confirmed the fragile nature of power sharing in the post-Roman world and demonstrated the ruthless pragmatism of early medieval politics. Ravenna remained the seat of Gothic kingship for decades to come, symbolizing not only the fall of one ruler, but the birth of a new political order on the Italian peninsula. The final act of Odoacer's life unfolded with dramatic intensity and profound consequences, marking the climax of a bitter struggle for control of Italy. By 493 AD, Odoacer had been besieged in Ravenna for nearly 3 years by the Ostrogothic king Theodoric, acting with the tacit support of the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno. The prolonged siege had weakened Odoacer's forces and drained the city's resources. Yet, despite enduring severe deprivation, Odoacer managed to negotiate a truce that seemed to promise a peaceful resolution. He and Theodoric would share power and jointly rule Italy. This agreement, fragile though it was, appeared to offer a compromise that preserved both leaders' positions. However, the pact proved to be a deadly illusion. On March 15, 493 AD, a ceremonial banquet was held in Ravenna to celebrate the peace treaty and publicly mark the reconciliation between the two rulers. The gathering was meant to symbolize unity and the end of a destructive civil conflict. Instead, it became the scene of Odoacer's assassination. According to the historian Jordanes, Theodoric approached Odoacer during the feast and struck him down with a sword, reportedly saying, "There was no room for two kings in Ravenna." The killing was sudden and brutal, underscoring the ruthless pragmatism of Theodoric's political strategy. Odoacer's closest supporters were also slaughtered, eliminating any remaining opposition. The assassination of Odoacer was not merely an act of violence, but a calculated move to secure uncontested rule over Italy. Theodoric understood that as long as Odoacer lived, his own claim to leadership, though sanctioned by Constantinople, remained unstable. By eliminating his rival, Theodoric ensured the political consolidation of the Ostrogothic kingdom. Ravenna, once the seat of Odoacer's power, became the capital of Theodoric's regime, symbolizing continuity in governance even as power changed hands. The city's survival as a political center reflected Theodoric's intention not to destroy Roman administration, but to inherit and transform it. Odoacer's downfall illustrates the precarious nature of rulership in the post-Roman world. Though he had succeeded in preserving Roman structures and balancing the interests of various factions, his position lacked the deep-rooted legitimacy that could withstand a determined and equally ambitious rival. His assassination brought a definitive end to the first Germanic kingdom in Italy and demonstrated how diplomacy, military force, and betrayal intermingled in the turbulent landscape of late antiquity. Odoacer's fate also echoed a broader pattern. Those who sought to bridge Roman traditions and Germanic rule often found themselves vulnerable to the ambitions of their fellow barbarians. In death, Odoacer left behind a legacy that was both tragic and foundational. His rule marked the end of the Western Roman Empire and the beginning of a new political order in Italy, one that would shape the contours of medieval Europe. Though he was slain, Odoacer's reign demonstrated that Roman governance could survive under non-Roman kingship, and that identity, tradition, and power were being reshaped in ways that would define the centuries to come. Odoacer's legacy occupies a pivotal space between the end of antiquity and the dawn of the medieval world. As the first non-Roman ruler of Italy following the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD, he is often credited with symbolizing the end of ancient Rome. Yet his legacy is more complex than simply marking the collapse of imperial power. Odoacer demonstrated that the transition from Roman imperial rule to Germanic kingship could be navigated while preserving core aspects of Roman administration. His governance showed that the continuity of Roman institutions, such as the Senate, legal systems, and municipal operations, could coexist with the political authority of a barbarian king. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Odoacer did not seek to eradicate Roman traditions, but to integrate them into his own rule. This allowed Roman elites and clergy to maintain influence during his reign and ensured societal stability during a period of profound upheaval. His reliance on Roman administrative structures became a model for future Germanic rulers, including Theodoric the Great, who expanded upon Odoacer's approach by governing through a pragmatic blend of Roman law and Germanic military authority. Odoacer laid the groundwork for what would become a defining feature of early medieval kingdoms: hybrid governance rooted in both Roman and barbarian traditions. Odoacer's significance also lies in his role as a transitional figure. While his rule signified the end of the Western Roman Empire, it did not herald the collapse of Roman culture or identity. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new era in which Roman concepts of citizenship, law, and urban life were adapted and carried forward under entirely new political conditions. His reign, though relatively brief, demonstrated how the Roman world could be reshaped without being destroyed. This adaptability would prove crucial in the centuries that followed, as Germanic and Roman identities gradually merged, giving rise to medieval European societies. Odoacer's dramatic downfall at the hands of Theodoric adds a tragic dimension to his legacy. His assassination in Ravenna reflects the ruthless power politics of the era, yet it also underscores the fragility of early post-Roman kingship. Despite his efforts to maintain a delicate balance between Roman and Germanic interests, Odoacer ultimately fell prey to the same forces of ambition and betrayal that had undermined Roman authority before him. His fate became a cautionary tale for rulers navigating the increasingly unstable world that followed the empire's fall. In historical memory, Odoacer is often overshadowed by figures like Theodoric, Justinian, and Charlemagne, who left more expansive or long-lasting impressions on European history. However, his importance lies precisely in his role as a bridge between eras. Odoacer was the first to demonstrate that Italy could be governed without an emperor, by a king who respected Roman institutions even as he wielded barbarian power. His reign marked the beginning of post-imperial Europe, not through destruction, but through transformation, influencing the evolution of kingship, governance, and cultural identity in the centuries that followed. Odoacer, an enigmatic yet profoundly influential leader of the late 5th century, occupies a unique position in history as the first barbarian king to rule Italy after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, born around 433 AD into a Germanic tribal elite, likely the Scyrii, and possibly tied to Hunnic or Rugian backgrounds. Odoacer rose through the ranks of the late Roman military at a time when the empire was struggling to maintain control amidst ongoing civil wars, external invasions, and economic decay. His father, Edeco, had political connections to Attila the Hun, and Odoacer himself grew up deeply immersed in the world where tribal identities and Roman institutions increasingly overlapped. Odoacer's rise began as a commander of foederati troops, barbarians serving in the Roman army under special agreements. In this role, he displayed exceptional leadership, particularly during the chaotic last decades of the Western Empire. He entered into the service of Orestes, a Roman general who seized power and appointed his own young son, Romulus Augustulus, as the last Western Roman emperor. However, when Orestes refused to grant his barbarian soldiers the Italian lands promised to them, Odoacer led a mutiny that toppled Orestes' regime. In 476 AD, Odoacer deposed Romulus, sending him into a life of exile rather than killing him, and declared himself King of Italy, Rex Italiae, effectively ending the 1,229-year history of the Western Roman Empire. Rather than claiming the imperial title, Odoacer sought recognition from the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, tactically positioning himself as a loyal vassal rather than a usurper. He sent the imperial regalia, symbols of Western rulership, to Zeno, acknowledging the emperor's authority. In return, Zeno granted him the title Patricius and permitted him to rule Italy. This gesture not only preserved Roman legitimacy, but also set the stage for Odoacer's unique style of governance, one that maintained the Senate, upheld Roman law, and allowed Roman institutions and elites to operate with minimal disruption. Odoacer granted lands to his Germanic followers, yet preserved much of the Latin, Christian, and Roman administrative structure. His rule demonstrated that a non-Roman ruler could inherit the mantle of power while safeguarding elements of Roman identity. Odoacer's reign, 476 to 493 AD, was marked by stability, religious tolerance, and administrative consistency. He maintained peace and fostered cultural continuity during a time of immense transition, yet he remained perpetually vulnerable due to his outsider status and growing autonomy, which troubled the Eastern court. When Odoacer later expanded his influence into regions like Dalmatia and Noricum, Emperor Zeno saw him as a threat. As a strategic countermeasure, Zeno encouraged the Ostrogothic king Theodoric, himself seeking a new homeland for his people, to invade Italy and replace Odoacer. The war between Odoacer and Theodoric was lengthy and brutal, with the siege of Ravenna, 490 to 493 AD, marking its defining episode. Ravenna, protected by marshes and fortifications, provided strong resistance, but eventually Odoacer agreed to negotiate. A peace treaty was brokered, supposedly allowing both rulers to share power. However, during a banquet meant to seal their agreement, Theodoric assassinated Odoacer in a calculated move to eliminate his rival. His famous words, "There cannot be two kings in Ravenna," captured the ruthless reality of early medieval politics. Odoacer's death marked the definitive end of the first barbarian kingdom in Italy. Yet his legacy is one of integration rather than destruction. He managed to govern Italy using a hybrid model where Roman and Germanic elements coexisted, paving the way for future rulers like Theodoric, Justinian, and the Lombards. His reign showed that the collapse of the Western Empire did not equate to cultural or institutional amnesia. Instead, Roman governance survived, adapted, and evolved. In this sense, Odoacer stands not merely as a destroyer of empire, but as a transitional pioneer whose kingship bore the seeds of medieval European statecraft. In historical memory, Odoacer is often overshadowed by later figures. yet his influence ripples across the centuries. He represents both the end of Roman antiquity and the beginning of a new, post-imperial world. His rule marked the birth of medieval Italy, a kingdom where Roman law, Christian faith, and barbarian leadership combined to forge a new political order. Through both his achievements and his downfall, Odoacer embodies the complex, intertwined identities that shaped Europe's transformation from the ancient to the medieval era.